Welcome back to Milan Recording Studios. Today I'm here in Studio B with a very cool instrument and a very cool video that I will do on this instrument. I'm actually going to be playing a song that was written by the Doors in the 1970s, and it was originally performed on a Vox combo organ, which has transistors in it, but it works really well on the harpsichord. And so after I talk a little bit about this harpsichord, which some of you may be familiar with, I will play that song, and hopefully you will agree with me that it works insanely well on the harpsichord. And I get the feeling that if the Doors had access to a harpsichord when they were thinking about recording that song, they might have recorded it. Certainly the intro to the song on the harpsichord, because it just works way too well. Now, some of you, as I said, might be familiar with this harpsichord if you saw my review that I uploaded of it a little bit while ago. I was in Toledo, Ohio, and I came across this really cool piano store that has a lot of cool pianos, a very cool organ, and also this very cool harpsichord. And so I was looking around at the store, and I found this harpsichord, and I really liked it, and I thought it was cool, as you could probably tell if you went and watched that video. If you haven't seen it already, you might find it rather interesting. And so I liked this harpsichord and walked around the store, and eventually I ended up purchasing this instrument because it's really, really awesome. And it's awesome not only because it's a harpsichord, but there's one very special feature about it that makes it extremely special to me as a player of an instrument. And I'm going to show you that right now. So first of all, if I take off this this wooden panel that I actually wasn't sure how it came off in the first video, in the review, so if you're curious what's under here, now is your chance to see it. You will not only see all of the mechanisms and the plectrums and all the little doodads inside that do cool things, but you'll also notice that this instrument has a metal frame, very much like a piano. And that is very unusual for a harpsichord, because traditionally harpsichords were all wood. Of course, they had metal strings and probably some other metal components in there, like the pins and stuff, but the frame of the harpsichord was made entirely out of wood. So this company, which by the way is Sabathil and Son, what they did is they added this really awesome metal frame to the harpsichord, and it makes it probably the most stable stringed instrument that I have ever seen in my life. It certainly holds a tune as good as a piano, but if you think about it, it should hold a tune much better than a piano, and in fact I believe it does. Simply because there's far less tension from the strings on the harp, and therefore it stays in tune much longer. If you go back and watch that review I did and you listen to how the harpsichord sounds, it is rather out of tune, but what's interesting is the store owner told me that the last time that harpsichord had been tuned was 3 years before I made that video. And so yes, the instrument was rather out of tune. I have tuned up the unisons and made it a lot better now, but I find it interesting that the instrument hadn't been tuned in 3 years since I found it, and it was still very playable, and it was actually not that far out of tune at all. Like I said, the unisons were out and some of the notes were a bit out, but overall it was actually quite playable. And as you can see, the harp runs all the way around the rim of the instrument, very much like a piano's harp does. In some ways, this is actually a little less beefy than a piano's frame, but in other ways, it's actually much more beefy in some ways, and I will show you that in a minute. But as you can see, it runs all the way along the rim of the instrument. There are no cross braces and all kinds of crazy stuff like that on this instrument like there are on a piano. It's because, as I mentioned, there's not as much tension on the frame of this instrument as there would be on a piano, but we do have a very solid steel metal frame here that does an awesome job of keeping this instrument in tune. Now, what I mentioned earlier about, in some ways, this instrument kind of goes a little further than a piano's frame does, and you can see that underneath. And so let me take you under there and show you why, in some ways, this harp is actually a little bit more, a little more beefy compared to the size of the instrument than on a piano's harp. So here we are on the underside of the harpsichord, and I just wanted to show you, first of all, the soundboard here. It's a little bit interesting. The ribs on it are much, much smaller than on a piano, and the soundboard itself is very, very thin, and it resonates very well, which would make sense because, as you can see, the surface area of this particular soundboard is much smaller than that on a piano. And also the strings are much smaller than those of a piano, and so the soundboard has to vibrate very freely to amplify the sounds. But what I really wanted to show you down here is the metal frame, which even continues down here on the side of the harpsichord. This is the side of the harpsichord. This here, up here, is the front of it, and that's where the keys would be, right under there. So you can see that there is actually a metal frame that runs all the way on the underside of the harpsichord as well, and you probably also noticed this tube here that runs from one side of the harpsichord all the way to the other over there. And you can see here that there's even more of that metal framing, which is something that almost no piano manufacturers do. Mason & Hamlin does have the tension resonator, which helps hold the piano together, but no piano manufacturer that I know of has ever put metal on the side of the piano like this for additional bracing. So it's very interesting to see the lengths that this company went through to really make their harpsichord as stable as possible, and it really, really worked. Hopefully you found that little part underneath the instrument rather interesting. Probably not many of you have been able to see the underside of a harpsichord, and certainly not one that's like this. I mentioned Mason and Hamlin, how they have that metal frame under the piano, but that is designed to keep the soundboard in check and keep the crown of the soundboard perfect over the many, many years the piano exists, and it's not really there for tuning stability whatsoever, whereas that metal crossbrace on this definitely is for tuning stability. Now, if you watched that review and you're curious how the underside or the inside of this instrument works, since I didn't take off this wooden plate, now is your chance to be able to see the inside, and I'll show you how it works. Now, basically, we have two sets of plectrums, and so this one here up front is the main set. And you can actually take these out, and you can even see the way they work. You can see a little tooth here, and what that does is when you push up on the plectrum, it plucks the string, and then that makes the string vibrate, and then when you let go of the note, it falls back down, and it's got a little hinge there so that it falls back past the string without plucking it a second time, and then this is a little damper that then dampens the string once this whole mechanism falls back into place. These two screws at the top and bottom are for adjustment. This one is a height adjustment, so if the note doesn't play too early, or it doesn't play if it plays too late, or if it's not playing early enough, you can adjust this. And this one here actually adjusts the plectrum, so it basically changes how far under the string this little tooth goes, and then that will change the way the note feels and also the way it plays. So that fits in there, and like I said, there's two rows of them, and this mechanism right here, as well as one on the other side of the instrument, actually moves the second set of plectrums. So right now, when this stop is pushed in, only the 8-foot set of strings is playing. That's the lower pitched set of strings, and when I pull this in, the second layer of plectrums comes in, and then they will actually work, just like so. So you can hear that there's actually two sets of strings playing there. And when I push this back, there's only the one set of strings. So that's how that works. There's actually two different strings for each note, and then when you pull this stop out, the second higher pitched set of string, which is a 4-foot stop, comes into play. Quite literally. You might be noticing these little rows of little foam circles here, and these are little mutes. Basically what they do is they bump up against one set of strings, so if you put the little lever in the right hand position, it's muting the 8-foot stop. As you can hear, it changes the timbre and also decreases the sustain. And then if you move it to the left, it actually is changing the higher set of strings, as opposed to. You can hear that there is a difference there. And basically what that is, I believe it's called a lute, and what it kind of makes the harpsichord sound like is a plucked string instrument, which of course the harpsichord is, but it makes it sound like a little bit more like a instrument that might be plucked by hand or something like that. It definitely gives a harpsichord a much different sound, whether or not it is supposed to sound like a lute or not. I have heard it called a lute sound before. Whoops, I have that disengaged. Let me pull that out. It kind of sounds like a hand-plucked instrument with shorter sustain than a harpsichord. Now this stop over here changes the main set of plectrums for the 8-foot stop. So if you pull this out, they're engaged, and if you push it in, they are deactivated. So then you can only use the 4-foot stop if you want to. And then if you push this one back in, which takes out the 4-foot, and pull this one in out, which activates the 8-foot. I have the lute thing activated. And then you can pull this out. You can hear that there's a lot of different possibilities here with the sound of this instrument, and it's really, really cool. Now, unlike a piano, which typically action parts on a piano do not break, hammer shanks usually don't break when you're playing a piano. Action parts can go out of regulation, but usually they won't break. However, a harpsichord is a much different instrument. As you can see here, the mechanism is much different, and therefore sometimes little pieces in there will break. A lot of times plectrums will break, and so this instrument still needs a little bit of service, but finding part feeds is a little bit difficult. So not all of the notes are working perfectly. There's a few at the top that aren't working great, but at some point I will get around to fixing that. But for the most part, this instrument is working very well. And so I just wanted to mention that because some of those notes there's a couple little strings missing as well, which is another thing that rarely, it can happen on pianos, but usually when you're playing the instrument, the notes won't break. And I don't know how those strings broke. They were broken before I purchased the instrument, but there's only like 3 or 4 strings here that would need to be replaced. So that's something I'll do in the future as well. But I just wanted to disclose that the instrument just has a couple little things that are wrong with it. So now I'm going to talk one more little moment about the action on this instrument, because I actually received a comment on one of my other harpsichord videos about what the action on a harpsichord feels like compared to a piano action. And I'm going to say that it feels a lot different, because as you can see inside, instead of moving a hammer up towards the string, what you're doing is you're plucking the string with a little device. So when you push the note down, you can really feel that. As you can see, there's a little bit of slop in the key, and when you push it down, that is simply moving the plectrum up, and then when you push the note down, then it is pushing the plectrum up, and it's plucking the string. So this instrument, I've fine-tuned it a little bit, so it's pretty smooth feeling, but if the plectrum is moved a little bit further under the string, it really has a very jolty feel, and you'll push the note down, and then it'll kind of go boom, and it'll click into place, and the note will sound. So it feels a lot different, but other than that, it's very light, and it has a very, very light feel, because you're not moving very much mass at all. In a piano, you have very large hammers, but in this, you don't have those. So the action feels very, very light as compared to a piano. But I just thought I'd answer that question that I received on one of my other harpsichord videos, because in that video, I actually forgot to mention about the action on a harpsichord, and I thought I'd answer it in this video, since I'm here with a harpsichord. So I'm just going to put these back in place, and then I will play that song. And hopefully you guys enjoy it, because I think, as I said earlier in the video, it works insanely well on the harpsichord, and hopefully you agree. Let me know what you thought, what you think of the song down in the comment section below. So hopefully you enjoyed that performance there of Light My Fire by The Doors, but played on a harpsichord. Like I said, I think that if Ray Manzarek had had access to a harpsichord, he might have used it in the original song, because it works just really, really well. And as you could hear, I also used the 8-foot and the 4-foot stops there during the little chorus there to kind of give it a different sound and make it sound more full. So that kind of shows what the harpsichord can do, as well as what that song sounds like on a harpsichord. I received some comments on both my clavichord and the harpsichord video that I did in the past to do more funky beats on the harpsichord, not only to play Bach music on it, but also to play something like Superstition or some more modern rock music. And so while Superstition is going to be coming out in the future on this harpsichord, for now I thought I'd play Light My Fire by The Doors, because it works really weirdly well on this instrument, and hopefully you agree as well. So let me know what you thought of that down in the comments down below. I love to hear you guys' feedback on stuff like that. And also let me know what you think of this harpsichord. If you've ever heard of one that has a metal frame, from what I know, this company didn't make these for very long, because from what I understand, there was a lot of backlash. Collectors, they don't want an instrument that has a metal frame. They want something that's authentic to the 1790s, not something that was made in 1970 with a modern twist on the harpsichord. So while collectors dislike these instruments, to the best of my knowledge, I personally love this instrument, and I think it's awesome that it has a metal frame and can stay in tune for theoretically about 3 years or somewhere along those lines. It's pretty wild that it can stay in tune for that long. So if you want to go check out my channel, I've got lots of videos. You can go check out the original review I did on this harpsichord as well. You might find that kind of interesting, and to see what I thought of it then and how it sounded like then when it hadn't been tuned for 3 years and compared to what it sounds like now. And also you can hear me play some Bach music and even some Pirates music on that instrument, which is kind of cool. I've also got videos on organs and traditional pianos and all kinds of cool stuff on my channel as well. So if you want to go check that out, you can, and if you want to subscribe, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.